Okay. All right. I want to welcome everyone to Legal Business Entities. We have our very own SCORE Boston co-chair, Bill Halsey, and he's going to have a ton of information for you and be able to answer all your questions about the different business entities that are available to you. I want to start off by talking about SCORE just a little bit. SCORE has two main focuses, one being training through our webinars, and I strongly encourage you to check out our website and watch for those newsletters because we have about every possible topic you can imagine this fall, and then we'll be restarting again in January with a whole nother set of topics. But the most important thing that SCORE does is their mentoring. The mentoring is free and confidential, and our mentors are volunteers that have different experiences and knowledge that they want to share with you. And who are we talking to? We're talking to those that are thinking about trying to start a small business, those that are in that process of starting a small business, and those that already have a small business and they're looking to grow or have questions or issues that they're trying to deal with. I'm often asked, what is a mentoring session like? Well, that first session is about getting to know you and what your goals are. And the mentor will help you come up with a plan to keep moving forward along your path. You do not have to have your business already established or registered or any of those things. We're there to help you from step one. And if you're on step 10, we're ready to help you at that point too. Okay, so how do you get a mentor? You can put a note in chat and just say, hey, I need a mentor, and I'll make sure the right chapter reaches out to you. Or you can go to the different chapter websites that are listed here. Those are all for our whole district. I will put those in chat so that you can take a look at those. If you haven't been on the website, I strongly encourage you to do that as well. There is a library section that has all kinds of tools and templates, and you can find recordings to previous webinars, etc. Just a lot of information that will be beneficial to you. We're going to go ahead and just use the chat today for any questions, and we'll try and answer questions as we go along where appropriate. So don't be shy. Ask your questions. This is the time. We got a great presenter that has a lot of knowledge that he can share with us. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my share. And Bill, if you want to go ahead and
I will try to do the same.
Put your slides up.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Can we all see that?
Yep.
Great. Well, let me just reinforce what Teresa said, and just to tell all of you that, you know, this door is wide open. If you have any questions about a business, don't hesitate to sign up for a meeting. We're here to talk to you at your level of readiness. And sometimes that's just, I've got kind of a dream and I want to bounce it off somebody. So please, you and anybody that you know who's thinking about a business, in addition to people that are running one, don't be shy, as Teresa said, about getting in there. And let me tell you, we've got a good group here today. So as far as I'm concerned, if you'll just either put your questions in chat, I can probably follow along with those as we go through it. But if not, I think we'll have some time at the end as well to do that. So today's seminar is workshop is one part of a two-part series on legal issues in business foundations. So there's a bigger course that some of you may be participating in, but this one is really to talk about legal entities, the business forms, corporations, and so on, and to familiarize you with some of those and the pros and cons there. Just as a general disclaimer, we're not your attorneys, even though I am an attorney. But if you want specific advice about your specific situation, you should contact someone. And if you'll contact me, if you need referral to an attorney, particularly here in Massachusetts, some of whom are pro bono or low fee. And Teresa, you can feel free to put my email in there if you want to. I'll connect you with someone that might be able to help you if you have specific questions that require you to have an attorney. All right, so again, our goal today is for you to get a better sense of the most common types of business entities. And the way I want you to think about your choosing the business entity is part of your business model and your overall risk management strategy. You're going to hear more about insurance and risk management from some other workshops that Teresa has been running, including ways to limit your liability through contracts and so on. But today we're going to focus on one leg of what I call a three-legged stool of risk management. And one piece of that is choosing your business entity. Another piece of that is your contracts and so on. And the third leg of that stool is your insurance. So when you are going into business and preparing your business plan, we want to make sure that you're building a nice, stable foundation for your risk management. So some of the things that we think about when we think about a business entity are the ones that I'm going to talk about in the bullets. But the overall point that I want to make for you is that your business entity is a conclusion of your business plan, your business model. It's not a premise. It always makes me a little sad when I talk to somebody who's spent, if they're in Massachusetts, $500 or $600 at a minimum to create an LLC, but their business plan anticipates capital coming into the business in ways that an LLC isn't the most efficient way for that capital to come in, for example. Or maybe they're not even at the point where they need an LLC yet. They're very small and they can operate as a sole proprietor without any business entity. So what we always try to do, and what I meet probably 100 clients a year who want to talk about business entity, and in most of them, we get to the point of the LLC. It's simplest, as you'll see. But we also ask the question, is this the right time or a necessary time? So those are some of the framing ideas that I want you to keep in your head as we move along here. So the factors that we think about when we ask what's the right entity, and these are factors that have to do with your business plan, is number one, how many people are going to be an owner of the business? Is it going to be a single member business? Are there going to be active members? Are there going to be passive contributors to capital or otherwise? Will there be investors that might be corporations or venture or angel investors or so on? So part of what we ask you as we help you think about the right model is, where's that money going to come from? And who's going to be the decision maker? Who's going to be passively involved? Who'll be actively involved? Again, how will the business be capitalized? Another question is, how are you going to distribute revenues? And that third bullet is a function of how many people are in the business and the role that those investors or other members are playing. Are you going to distribute money through salaries? Are you going to distribute it to what looks like a partnership distribution? Are you going to issue shares and issue distributions to shareholders? The other issues are, which model based on your business plan is the most tax efficient for you? There are some models like the LLC, which is extremely tax efficient, but it has some downsides. And then there are some models that are a little less tax efficient, like a C Corp, but they allow you to do things like issue stock to venture firms and so on if you're moving in that direction. And then finally, because there are some limitations, we want to know the citizenship or permanent residency status of the owners, members, or shareholders. So in the broadest of strokes, that's what we're going to talk about over the next few slides. So the simplest form, which is not a business entity at all, is just being a sole proprietor. That's where you go to business, even with other people, but you don't have a business entity. You don't have a corporation or an LLC or a partnership registered with the state. And this is a status in terms of the liability component where you are individually liable for the actions of the company. So that's one critical difference between this and the entities that we're going to talk about after this. In terms of taxation, the money is considered your income from employment, and it's taxed to you at the individual level. So it's only taxed once, but it just flows into your Schedule C if you're an accountant type or do your own taxes, and that's just income from self-employment. The other issue there is that, and just as a side note, is a lot of people get a DBA, a doing business as, or a business certificate. That's not a business entity. That's just an alias. It's another way that you're required to tell the people, certainly in Massachusetts, when they see the name of your company, who's the actual individual behind that alias or that DBA name. And it certainly in Boston and other jurisdictions in the state of Massachusetts, if you're doing business in Boston, you're expected to file that what's called a business certificate there. But again, it's not an entity, it's just an alias. So the simplest, I think, form, and the one that really suits most of the people that we see in terms of an actual business entity, is called the limited liability company. A lot of people think it's limited liability corporation, but this is not a corporation. It's a limited liability company. And again, in terms of your business model, it can be single member or it can be multi-member. From a tax perspective, the LLC is what's known as a disregarded or a pass-through entity, which means the LLC is not going to be taxed for the income that when it comes to the company or the revenues, but the individual member or the multiple members will be taxed on that income as if it were theirs. And so one small distinction there is that if you're a single member LLC, just like with a sole proprietorship, you're going to, and except with one exception for the S Corp that I'll talk about in a little bit, that money is going to flow through your Schedule C, and it will come and join with your deductions, and then it will join the rest of your income from whatever other sources you have on your 1040. If you're a multiple member LLC, the LLC is going to issue a K-1 and treat that income like partnership income. That's just the way they do it. But again, no taxation at the entity level. The great benefit of every of these entities that we're going to talk about from here on down is that they provide a statutory presumption that you are not liable for the actions of the company. So that gives you a lot of protection in terms of that one leg of the three-legged stool that we talked about before. And as long as you run the company as if it is a separate entity from your personal finances and assets, then you'll be entitled to that protection. And again, it limits the liability to those assets. So what does it mean to run the company properly? It means things like getting a separate bank account, maintaining separate books from your personal life or any other businesses that you may have, so that the company really looks like it is its own freestanding entity, and that you know the difference between the company's money and your money, even though your personal money, even though ultimately that money is going to join the rest of your income, and it is indeed your assets, or you and your other members' assets. One variation, I guess the most important one, if you're in a business that's registered or licensed by the state, like physicians, dentists, massage therapists, even, there's a lot of different licensed professions in Massachusetts. A lot of them tend to be in the health field and so on. You can form what's called a professional limited liability company. And the benefit of that is that each professional, like each dentist, if we use that example in the PLLC, is insulated from liability for the actions of the other dentists or the other professionals. So that provides you with an additional layer if you meet the criteria that you're a licensed professional. but you would create that entity the same way that you would with a, let me just stick here for a minute. So there's if nolo.com, if you're ever thinking about how to set up an LLC, nolo.com, if you just Google limited liability company, Massachusetts, NOLO, they have a great step-by-step process that explains everything that you need to do in order to obtain an LLC in Massachusetts. You don't have to hire NOLO to do that, though you can, but we can help you through that process if you're doing it. It's very simple. You do it online. It costs about $525, I think, to do. But at the end of that process, it takes, I think, maybe an hour or two of your time, and you'll get your LLC within a couple of days there. Okay. Let me just stop and make sure that if you have questions, you should feel free to ask them as we go here. So again, we're still in the for-profit world. I'm going to talk about nonprofits in a minute. So the S corporation is a tax status. It is not a corporation. This slide may not be crystal clear on that, but a C Corp, an LLC, a partnership can apply to the IRS to be treated as to take what's called the S Corp election. And the S Corp comes from subchapter S of the Internal Revenue Code, and it's a section for small businesses. So you have to meet certain criteria, including the ones that I've laid out here, which is a limit of 100 shareholders who must be US citizens or permanent residents. And that means that you can't have any venture funds as part of your shareholders. So this would not be a tax status available to somebody whose business plan included venture funding or corporate investors and so on. It anticipates, it provides the same limitations of liability. These shareholders are not going to be working for the firm. They're going to look like a true shareholder. And the benefits here, and we can go into this more, is that it lets you kind of split the revenues of the entity so that some of those revenues can be treated as wages, and some can be treated as what would look like a partnership distribution. And the effect of that, if you're at a certain size, is that you can lower your tax burden. So this is a situation where you would really be wanting to talk to your accountant about what's the best model for you based on how much income you have from this business and what your other sources of income are. It's hard to answer these questions hypothetically because every case is a little different. So again, this is any entity that takes the tax status of the S Corp election becomes a disregarded entity. So even if you are a C Corp, as we're going to talk about in a second, you're not going to be subject to that double taxation if you qualify for the S Corp election. So the next business entity that we want to talk about here is kind of the classic C corporation, which is, the share issuing company, publicly traded or not. And there are, in certain instances, some benefits to a business taking the C Corp status, particularly if they want to issue shares to non-individuals who are US citizens, or they want to have unlimited shareholders. So there are benefits, but there are downsides to it too. One of which is that the corporate income is subject to taxation. And then the distributions to shareholders are subject to taxation, as are the wages paid to somebody who's might be considered an owner of the corporation. So the tax burden is going to be a little higher. And again, you want to have an accountant or somebody walk through these numbers with you and see if that's an appropriate status. Just let me say parenthetically, I'm not sure if it's on this slide deck or not, excuse me, but a lot of times, if you're working with one of these companies that wants to help you set up your business, they, for some reason, encourage people to file and create the entity in Delaware. Now, there was a time when that made sense, especially if you had big dreams of growth or you had some really complex corporate structure that needed Delaware type of rules and law. But that's not really the case anymore. Massachusetts has very sophisticated statutory protections and rules for any business entity. The court-based law is very clear. So whatever benefits there used to be in setting up in Delaware, I don't think really exist anymore. I suppose if you had a venture firm coming in and said, you know, we want you in Delaware because all the companies that we find are in Delaware, that's a different story. But for you, there's just running your own business without that one little caveat. There's really no reason for you to be in Delaware. And the downside there is, first, the fees are more expensive in Delaware. And if you register in Delaware and are doing business in Massachusetts, you're still going to have to register as a foreign corporation doing business in Massachusetts, which is going to add another expense to your filing because you're going to have to pay another $500 or $600 a year to be registered as that foreign, quote, Delaware corporation doing business in Massachusetts. So again, the C Corp, same limitations on individual liability, no limitations on who can be a shareholder. And that can be important if you are, for example, we get a fair number of people who are here on non-working visas, or they're in their final phase of their optional practical training or whatever, but they're not legally allowed to work in the States, but they can still own shares in a C corporation, just as they can create an LLC, but they can't work for the LLC, so their income can't be that. So if you're in that situation where you are here, you know, in a legal status, but that's not a status that allows you to work, then you can still set up a C Corp, you can still set up an LLC, you just can't receive employment income from that. So the next entity that we want to talk about here is the professional corporation, which is the corporate kind of analog to the professional limited liability company. Again, you're creating, a status that, like the corporation, is subject to the corporate tax unless you take this S Corp election, and it allows you to distribute shares and so on. And again, provides that individual liability for actions of the other members, just like a PLLC. Again, some of these really require a much more in-depth conversation with your accountant or your own lawyer based on really who's going to capitalize this company, who's going to be involved in it in an active or professional way. So you want to, it's hard to go much deeper into that right now, but again, there's we can provide deeper guidance if you sign up to talk to us, and maybe we can go through it and see if there's something, at least from our perspective, that would suggest a professional corporation versus a simple LLC or PLLC. Now, some of you will have heard of the benefit corporation or the B Corp. This is a corporation, it's a for-profit entity that's a little bit excused from the obligation to maximize shareholder value. And the point here is there was a lot of companies that wanted to do well by their employees, for example, or invest in other enterprises where some of the income wasn't demonstrably tied to the bottom line in terms of maximizing shareholder value. Now, typically when a corporation doesn't maximize shareholder value, they're susceptible to a lawsuit by the shareholders to say you're supposed to maximize shareholder value. So the B Corp, and it's a nationwide thing, but there's one in Massachusetts. It gives the officers of the company a broader discretion in terms of how the resources of the B Corp are going to be deployed. In other words, for a beneficial purpose that looks a little bit more like what you would see from the actions or the mission of a nonprofit. There is formal oversight of the public benefit mission. So in order to retain that status, you have to open your books a little more, and there's increased accountability to make sure that if you really are going to be entitled to this status, the regulators can be assured that the money you're going for that public benefit purpose or the benefit to better benefit your employees is actually going there. So it does promote a little more transparency in that regard. But there are people who still like this model because it does give them the opportunity to even say, look, we're a benefit corporation. We do the best we can for our employees by diverting more profit than we would typically divert in a pure shareholder maximization model to people like either our employees or partner organizations or what have you. So there are entities that simply create a partnership. Now, again, a multi-member LLC is a partnership in tax purposes, but the organizational structure of a partnership can be different than the organizational structure of an LLC with multi-members. What we will share with you, if you ever want to talk about either of these models, where you're not going to be a share issuing company, but you're going to have a multi-member decision-making process or ownership team, is either an operating agreement or a partnership agreement, and they're functionally pretty much the same thing, but they describe the benefits of and the rights and obligations of the members or the partners of the entity. And that's a critical document for you to have if you're setting up a multi-member LLC or a partnership, because that's a document that really describes how your company is capitalized, who owns what percentage of the company, what each person can do with their portion of the company if they want to get out or if they die, and where that can go. So all of those things need to be addressed up front, and they're addressed through a partnership agreement. Let's see here. Okay, so I'm going to stop there and make sure there are no questions about anything I've said so far, because I'm going to move on for a minute to nonprofit entities here. Any questions on anything?
I have not seen any questions posted. Yep. I definitely, like you said, strongly encourage you to do that if you want. If you don't want to have to type in your question, you are welcome to use the raise hand icon under reactions, and I can unmute you so you can ask your question out loud. That's not a problem. We have a question. I've heard that forming a benefit LLC does require the oversight of the benefit corps, and that Delaware is the one state not requiring public reporting. Is that true?
That I don't know. That's a good question. But again, I would not, if you're going to do your business in Massachusetts, if you are going to set up a Delaware corporation and register as a foreign entity in Massachusetts, I suspect you're going to be subject to the oversight that Massachusetts would impose on you. You're not going to get to skirt the rules of Massachusetts by creating your entity in Delaware and then, sliding into Massachusetts without the oversight that Massachusetts would impose on every B Corp that's registered here.
Is it possible to start in one formation and then change? For example, beginning as an LLC and then becoming a B Corp later?
Yes, there's a couple ways to do that. One is to simply dissolve the LLC and reform as a B Corp or a C Corp. Another way would be, there is a process, I think it applies to B Corps as well. I know it does to C Corps, but so I'm going to assume it is, where you can basically change the status of your entity from an LLC to the B Corp. It requires the members of the LLC to vote on that and approve it if there's more than one. And that's, again, something that you would be governed by your operating agreement. And then you would notify the state of this change in status, and they would effectively dissolve the LLC. Your LLC assets, if you have any, would transfer to the B Corp. You'd reform with the requirements of a B Corp in terms of a board and so on, and move ahead. You know, the question would be what would be gained by that. As always, if you transfer to a B Corp and you don't qualify or can't take the S Corp election, your tax status again is going to change and maybe a little more burdensome than in the past, but there may be upsides. And, you know, the other thing to remember with an LLC particularly is that unlike a C corporation, you don't have shareholders. So the benefit of the B Corp, again, is that you don't have to maximize shareholder return, or that's one benefit. But if you're an LLC, you don't really have that obligation, because you as a single member, or you with your other members, pursuant to your operating agreement, will determine how you're going to spend your revenues. So you can act like a B Corp in terms of being more generous with employee benefits or however you want that money to go without getting that status. But if you felt, for example, like your business model or your branding or marketing would be benefited by calling yourself a B Corp, that would be the way to do it. And just let me say parenthetically that in Massachusetts, the Secretary of the Commonwealth's homepage is incredibly clear and provides a ton of information about how to transfer within all these statuses and what forms you need to file. I find it very, very easy to read for a layperson. But again, you can always talk to me, or there's a couple lawyers in our chapter who would be happy to spend the time needed to talk about these in a little more detail with you, and then you know, suggest the right next step for you, and maybe give you a referral to somebody who can talk to you as an accountant or as a lawyer. Okay, any other questions?
That's it for now.
Oh, all right, thanks. Okay, so now we're going to hop to nonprofits, or tax exempt, or what are sometimes called charitable organizations. This is a broad group of companies. I always remind people that nonprofit is a tax status. It's not a business model. And the reason I say that is because, you know, you have to remember that places like Harvard University are nonprofits, even though they have a $40 billion endowment. Mass General Hospital is a nonprofit and, you know, brings in billions of dollars a year in revenues. So just in terms of thinking about things like your ability to pay yourself and to do well by doing good, as they used to say, you can achieve that under a nonprofit model if you are able to be recognized by the state first as an organization that's doing charitable work. And that's pretty broadly defined, but there are limits on it. But generally, anything that's furthering health or social welfare, education, cultural advancement, or whatever is going to meet that. The limitation on the nonprofit is that, unlike a for-profit, you don't own the assets of the company. You set up the for-profit and you manage it, and there's a board to manage it. But unlike the LLC and the corporation or whatever, those assets are never yours. You can be paid very well, depending on the revenues of the company. But if you were to dissolve the company, those assets would have to be distributed to another nonprofit. So the first step in the nonprofit process is to be recognized by the state. And again, we can help you, but if you'll go to nolo.com, again, I like them. Their stuff seems to be clear, and just type in again, nonprofit in Massachusetts. It'll tell you how to get recognized at the state level, which is the part of the process that recognizes the entity, and then how you apply for your tax exempt status, which is done through the IRS. Now, a lot of times we see smaller or early stage organizations that got their status, but they're not generating a lot of revenues yet, but they're ready to get that 501c3, which is the most common tax exempt category. There are 7 tax exempt categories, but for most people's purposes, the C3 is the most applicable one. And so we're faced with a question of, do we file the 1023 or do we file the 1023-EZ? And if you're a small corporation, a small nonprofit, you don't anticipate revenues over, let's say, $50,000 a year for the next several years, the 1023-EZ is a very attractive option. It's much shorter. You get your recognition much quicker, or at least your response, and typically you're recognized. So we like to channel people in that way. If they're, again, in a startup phase, they're not anticipating big grants or whatever. But it's with this document and the IRS recognition that you can more effectively go out and do your fundraising. So back to the business model question, we get a lot of people who come in who want to create a nonprofit, but we end up pushing the business model, and it turns out maybe it's not the right way to go, and that an LLC might be better. But if their model anticipates particularly funding in terms of grants from foundations or even individuals, then the nonprofit is probably going to be the preferred model. So all of these organizations that we talked about, the nonprofit one and the for-profit ones, are all required to engage in some annual reporting. For the nonprofit here, you're going to file the Form 990 and kind of a corollary form at the Massachusetts Attorney General's office called the Form PC. And these are public documents. If you're ever interested in looking up any given nonprofit, public charity, you can go to a site called guidestar.org, guidestar.org, and look up any entity that files any form of the 990. So you can, go see what's going on in your college or university or some charity that you have questions about. Years ago, our kids went to a little, daycare, and I thought, boy, they're charging a lot of money for this place. And so it was set up as a nonprofit. So I went there and looked, and something like 40% of the revenues of the company, of the nonprofit, were going into the executive director's pocket. So I said, that's a little rich. So I followed up with them and I said, look, I don't think this is right. And talked to the AG actually, and they actually ended up changing the compensation structure for the nonprofit, because it was actually just being treated like a for-profit. So let's see here. Okay, so we talked about these briefly. We'll just talk about some of the documents that you're going to want to see. Again, if you're an LLC with multi-members or a partnership, you're going to want that agreement that spells out how much each party has contributed to the organization, their ownership interest in the company, how votes are going to be made. A lot of times, I just talked to a couple of clients the other day about this, 2 people wanting to set up an LLC, and they wanted to set it up 50-50. So, fair. equitable. The problem is that works as long as it works. But a lot of times you'll see an LLC where even in the best of cases, the vision for the company changes over time, and 150% partner has a distinct vision for the company, and the other one has a different one, and they're at loggerheads and they can't move forward because neither of them has a deciding vote. So you need to address that issue of what you're going to do and whether you're going to have buyout language or buy-sell language to ensure that the company doesn't get stuck in the worst case because the partners no longer get along, but in the best case because they just have a different, both legitimate visions for the company, but they're not compatible. So bylaws are documents that set the rules for corporate functioning, particularly for nonprofits, which are required to have them, and for corporations. And they look a little like an operating agreement, but they encompass other rules around them because bylaws anticipate boards of governance. These are people that are not managing the company, but they provide an oversight or governance responsibilities for the people, the administrators, or the people who are running the company. And those are particularly important. Again, if you've got a C Corp, if you've got a nonprofit, if you're issuing shares, then you're going to have a stockholders agreement. And this is an area that, again, you need professional help because there's a lot of regulation around the issuance of stock, putting aside publicly issued stock. Even privately held stock is governed by a lot of federal rules. So you need to make sure you're getting somebody with a good sense of what those rules are, and they're accounting for those when you're issuing those that stockholder. You're issuing shares to a stockholder. We talked about the S chapter or the subchapter S election a little bit. Again, that's not an entity. You're not changing the form of your entity. You're changing the structure under which you're going to be taxed. All of these entities, all of the entities are going to have a separate EIN. Again, that's the kind of one of the early steps to distinguish you from the entity. This is going to be a number that's issued by the Internal Revenue Service and starts to create that space between you and them. And again, just to repeat what I said earlier, if you have a DBA, you have an alias, but you don't have an entity. And it surprises me how many people come who think, oh, well, I've got a DBA, so I'm protected from liability for my personal assets. And that's just not the case. So that is pretty much my presentation. I wonder if you have any more questions. I'm happy to try to answer them. I don't know, Teresa, if you put my email in the chat, but you're welcome to do that. And yep. Okay, thank you. And just want to encourage you again to don't hesitate to reach out, even if it's with the simplest question. Let us answer that and let's see where it goes. If you've got a dream that we want to help you foster, we don't really at all care where you are in that process, even if it's just, I think I could start selling X, Y, or Z or making X, Y, or Z. So
we have some questions, Bill.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Can you share the website that helps with the steps again?
Yes. If the way I find it is I just Google Mass LLC, nolo.com. Nolo.com is it's one of these online legal firms, and they offer a ton of stuff, and you can pay them to set you up, but what they have is it just provides you a step-by-step checklist of that.
Okay. Is an EIN required for a single member LLC?
No. You can use your own, but again, at the very minimum, you want to make sure you're running your bank accounts through a separate bank account, so that you're creating that distinction between your personal assets and the assets of the LLC. The EIN is free, so it's hard for me to think of a reason not to get one, just to do that. And then you would go to your bank and just say, look, I just need a business account set up under this name and the name of my LLC.
I don't have any other questions posted at this time.
Okay.
Oh, wait. I'm mistaken. Ooh, this is a long one. Okay. If I were to
take them a while to type.
Yeah. If I were to form a benefit LLC, in parentheses, note, only a dozen states offer this entity, not to be confused with benefit corporation. As a consultancy starting out with just making all the money exclusively by doing online consultations over Zoom with no product sales. If I incorporate in Delaware for the reason ascribed in my earlier question and form a virtual mailing address bank account in Delaware to receive all revenues, can I eventually or effectively only be taxed in Delaware at the state level, or does the state we pay income tax for purely depend on where we physically do work from? And is there a way to note on tax forms that we are digital nomads traveling out of state most of the year to allow for this freedom, even if our rent is paid monthly out of the Delaware state?
That is a long question. You're right. So let me see if I can tease it out this way. If you are a business who is a digital nomad, as you say, and you incorporate in Delaware in order to get what you think is a more beneficial treatment of the entity, because it's an LLC, your tax is still going to be imputed to you, and that is going to be, you're going to be taxed in the state in which you are a resident. So even though you own the company, if you live in Massachusetts, setting up the company in Delaware isn't going to change where you're taxed. It might, I don't know the answer to this, it might lead to, Delaware's a little quirky this way. I haven't really dug into it, but I think even though they don't tax the entity, I think they have, I don't remember what they called it, some sort of excise tax, not an income tax, based on the revenues of the company. So if you go to their website, the Delaware Secretary of State, you'll see what the expectations are for that. And it's just my memory that they, like California does, they do take a little more money than the annual filing fee out of an LLC. You certainly wouldn't be taxed at the federal level for that still, but your income tax is going to be based on your state of residence. So if you're a Mass resident, but you set up the corporation in Delaware, you're still going to pay Mass taxes on that. And I would suspect not Delaware taxes on your personal income. But again, you would want to double check my thinking or my concern that that LLC is going to pay some sort of tax for you in Delaware. The other point is, if you're truly digital, then I think we've addressed your kind of questions about where you need to be registered and where your taxes are going to come from. But if you're defined as doing business in a given state, then you're going to be subject to at least a registration requirement. And each state defines doing business a little differently. I agree with you that if you're sitting in Massachusetts and you're incorporated in Delaware, but you never set foot in the jurisdiction that might want to tax you, then you're probably not going to be susceptible to taxes from those states and not going to be required to register there as a foreign corporation. So did I touch all your bases?
It seems to me that you have, but I definitely encourage our question asker to let us know if there's a part of that we need to clarify. But if we're, we have more. But if we're traveling and not living in the domicile state for over half the year, are here special taxes that apply, or are there special taxes that apply?
Well, you have to be domiciled somewhere, right? I don't know if this is the same questioner asking all these questions? If so, I would start by saying, this is a hard game to beat. Let me just put it that way. I know there's a lot of stuff on the internet about how to do this, but you can end up paying more to your accountant and maybe a lawyer trying to wiggle your way out of tax liability or some registration liability that fundamentally doesn't gain you all that much, and opens you up to potential audit, which is, can be an expensive risk. So again, without knowing the details, and there's certainly huge corporations that spend a lot of money trying to beat the tax code and the registration code. So I get that. But if you're a small business, you really have to ask yourself, what's the benefit of creating more inefficiency in your administrative structure and your potential tax structure by trying to find what look like loopholes in the law? But to your kind of gating question there, U.S. citizens and permanent residents are subject to U.S. taxation regardless of what state they live in. So if you're not a resident of Massachusetts, but somewhere you're going to be subject to tax, or you're going to be subject to partial tax in many states. If you go overseas and you're out of the country for more than that 6 months, so you're not resident, then you're going to become, in every jurisdiction that I know of, and we have a pretty wide tax treaty system with a lot of other countries, you're going to be subject to taxes in the country that you are residing in. So if you go to Portugal, for example, and live there for 8 months of the year, even though your income is derived from your US-based business, I suspect that Portugal is going to say, well, you're a resident of Portugal, that we'll let you offset your US tax by what you owe us. But the point of these multilateral tax treaties is, and they call it a tax net for a reason, because it's there to catch you. So again, if you want to connect with me and talk some more about this, we can do it, and maybe even bring in some other people. But the general rule is that you're going to get taxed once by somebody, I guess is what I would say.
Okay. I do not have any more questions that were posted.
Okay.
I did put in the chat the location of the recording. It should be there within the next 24 hours. And oh, we have another question. Could you talk some about the pertinent economic nexus legalities and whether one type of entity would make sense if we were to start an e-commerce store? Do the interstate laws apply equally to physical and digital products?
So that's a good question. We're talking so far about taxation of the entity and the individuals who own the entity or are shareholders in the entity. The issue that comes up when you ask that question, in my mind, is things like sales tax, and whether you're going to be liable for sales tax for providing your goods or services to residents of the state that might want to impose a sales tax on you. And my sense is I'm not entirely sure. I haven't looked at this really recently, but I don't think we have a federal level overarching compact among the 50 states about how sales tax income is treated by the states. So I think you would have to understand, and again, this would be something that is typically very clearly spelled out in the states in which you would be selling to your customers, what the expectation is for withholding sales tax, collecting and withholding sales tax, and then distributing it to the taxing jurisdiction, most likely a state. So tell me if you think that answers the question.
Okay. Well, I guess I would encourage at this point, if that didn't answer the question, well, let me see. Any mentions on digital versus physical sales?
Well, physical sales are always going to be taxed in the state in which the brick and mortar is located. So in terms of if you're doing business in Rhode Island, let's say, but you're a Massachusetts corporation, again, if you're an LLC, you're going to be taxed because you're a Massachusetts resident. But you'll also have to, if you set up as a Mass LLC doing business in Rhode Island, I don't know what their rule is, but again, they may charge these excise taxes the way I think Delaware does. But things like sales tax are going to be subject to the jurisdiction in which the brick and mortar is located.
Okay, and just a reminder, that you absolutely could have this conversation with Bill or any of our other mentors if you wanted to book a mentoring session. You don't have to get into the weeds on other business topics. It can be just, I'd like to meet with a mentor to talk about one topic. And this is a great example of that. And they could actually talk to you based on your personal business information or what information applies directly to you. I think that's important to note that. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. And I hope you guys all have a good weekend. We're almost there. And thank you, Bill, for giving a great information-packed presentation.
You're very welcome. Thanks, guys. Don't hesitate to reach out. Bye-bye.